By way of introduction, my name is Ramesh Dwarkanath. I'm a principal solutions architect at AWS, and been with AWS for about 7 years now. So been worked with majority large customers, small customers across the country and the globe. So it just kind of different perspectives around what our customers do, the different types of customers, different shapes and sizes, and we work with them for all kinds of solutions. So today we're going to talk about the hybrid cloud and multi-cloud solutions. Um, so just a quick agenda. We have going to talk about what AWS brings to the table or offers from the whole spectrum, right? From a cloud on one end to the edge on the other end. And we're going to go through a little bit of detail there. We're going to talk about the on-premises infrastructure. What are the connectivity options? What other options? I know the previous speaker did mention Outpost, and that's something definitely we'll touch upon. You talk about far edge, right? Edge that's at the literally at where there is no connectivity, completely edge, and how do you bring that data, that do processing and so on, and bring that back into AWS? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Then processing at the edge, right? So you want to be able to do something quick where your customers are, do some sort of computing, whether it's for security reasons, for performance reasons. So we talk about the processing at the edge. And then, finally, we'll talk about some of the multi-cloud solutions, different scenarios, and to how we work with other cloud providers, how our solutions, our services work with other cloud providers. So we're going to go into that a little bit. So with that, so first and foremost, right, before we dive into any of the services, I mentioned about some other customers that we have worked with. So, customers, you have to build services that is working backwards from a customer need, right? So, when you bring out a service or a product, you want to make sure that it's actually servicing the customers where, in an appropriate way. So, what we have learned from them is that they want to extend the cloud benefits everywhere. So everybody loves the cloud. They want to be on the cloud, but for many reasons, right? They have some local data centers or they have other cloud providers. So they want to bring that same infrastructure, services, tools, and most importantly, experience, right? As to wherever they are, right? We want to meet them where they are in their journey, right? So whether they are in the cloud or on premises or in the edge, right? So we want to be able to have similar consistent benefits. There are a lot of use cases which are very specific around why a hybrid cloud services needed, things like low latency applications. You want to be able to do some local data processing, some data residency requirements. Those are all some of the examples of use cases. And then what the customers have also told us is there are challenges, right, with the solutions. There is complexity. There is the maintenance of these services on at the premises or on the edge, right? So how do you solve all that stuff, right? Um, Apart from that, the first and foremost and the main ask that the customers is they want the same experience no matter where they are, right? They want the same reliable, secure, and high performance infrastructure, right? What they get from the cloud. They want to have that same operational consistency. They want to have that same, access model and so on and so forth. The APIs, right? They want to have a consistent set of APIs that for all the services that they access. They want the same tools for automation, deployments, security controls. They don't want to have, different sets of tools. And, again, it's a challenge, in terms of enablement, in terms of maintaining it, and so on and so forth, and the complexity that we talked about in the previous slide, right? So you want to have a same set of tools that pretty much gives you a very consistent experience. And then you want to be able to get that same pace of innovation as you do in the cloud, right? So cloud is, we're innovating quite fast, and we want to be able to bring that same level of innovation back into either your on-premises or on the edge, right? So from an AWS perspective, right? We talked about the spectrum. We talked about, the cloud on one end and the edge on the other end. So if you really look at it, so we have the regions, the AWS regions, availability zones, and so on and so forth. That's really our cloud infrastructure. That's really a global infrastructure, spans across the globe, high connectivity, and everybody uses it and is very familiar with that. Then we move on to essentially big metro areas where there is a specific need to have some quick, low latency processing. So we work closely with the telco networks, and we have things like, CloudFront, which is a CDN, which of course spans across on the cloud also. But we also have things like local zones, which is essentially a localized area where you can get some low latency processing. Then we go on to on premises, right? So we'll talk about Outposts, which is really bringing kind of the AWS infrastructure onto your own data center. And then we talk about the other option is to use containers. So whether we are using the Elastic Container Service, which is AWS offering for managing the containers, or it is EKS, which is managed Kubernetes to anywhere, which is really to manage the containers through Kubernetes, right? And then finally, you have the far edge where we talk about whether it's on a ship or it's in some remote, base, in a remote area where there's no connectivity and so on. How do you take that? How do you do some local processing? How do you, help, get the data from there? So we will talk about, we'll go a little bit more detail into things like Snow Family, which is really our, storage, family of storage that actually helps you with some local compute and storage itself. So on premises, right? So we talk about that. That's an important aspect. That's an important topic for our customers. And here are the connectivity options. Whether you can connect directly on the public internet itself. Things like public IPs that you assign to your VMs, or elastic IPs, which are like for specific IPs that are attached to specific VMs that you need, but again publicly accessible. There is the internet data out that we have, and just recently we announced that we have removed, made it free for our customers, the internet data out pricing. The second one is VPN. There are multiple flavors of VPN. We have the managed VPN, we have the software VPN, and then we have something called as transit gateway, which is essentially a network service that actually provides connectivity across your on-premises, across the different VPCs. And so that way you don't have to have this complex mesh kind of architecture, but it helps you kind of really simplify that whole network architecture across multiple regions and across multiple areas. And then finally, you have Direct Connect, which is a direct connectivity provided, and it's separate from the internet, and it's really provided. It's a direct line into from your data center into an AWS region with speeds of dedicated speeds of 1 gigabits per second or 10 gigabits, or you can also go through a partner to get like sub 1 gigabits per second speeds. And it's the whole point of Direct Connect is to have a consistent network experience. So you're not necessarily subjected to the vagaries of a public internet and going down and so on and so forth, performance and latency and so on and so forth. Direct Connect lets you give very consistent network experience. So Outpost, we talked about that. Essentially, it's bringing the AWS infrastructure onto your data center, right? So it's the same. It comes in a couple of flavors. We'll talk about that, and it's the same AWS design infrastructure as in our AWS data centers, right? So and so it offers exactly the same kind of compute, same memory and so on, and all kinds of processing. The services, we'll talk about that. The services that are supported on that. So essentially, it's providing you an AWS region, right, close to you in your own data center. It's fully managed, operated by AWS, as if in all the different regions, just like the regions are, and it's a single pane of management. That's the real cool part about this, is that when you go to your console and you look at your environment, this will show up as another availability zone or another region, another area within your region, to say that, okay, now I can actually deploy my workloads across cloud and now on Outpost, which will look just like cloud, right? So that's kind of really the neat part, is like it's very seamless, transparent to the end user once it's all set up and running.
Ramesh, we've got
Yes.
about 8 or 9 minutes just to manage your time with
Yeah.
all this great content.
Yeah. So just walking around a little bit. So we talk about, I talked about the two types of outposts. One is the outpost rack, and which is pretty much a full rack in a data center, which has full dual redundancy and so on and so forth. And that is really what you put into your data center, and it's all managed by AWS. Apart from that, we also have these smaller versions called outpost servers. That's more for smaller offices, branch offices and so on, where there is not enough space, but you still need connectivity. That's where you would use your outpost server. So this outpost is a great way to actually bring AWS literally into your own local environment. So these are just a quick summary of services that are available on Outpost. And as you can see, a lot of these services, and they're always, we are always increasing the services that are supported on Outpost. So definitely the list keeps, getting added on more and more. Coming to the far edge. So far edge, right? So what is far edge? So it's really, you're talking about data, coming from the, self-driving cars, or you're talking about, collecting data from, ships and, out in the ocean, or maybe, going from the manufacturing floors and so on, or even your like iRobot or Roomba, or, things like that, where you collect your data from. All that is actually shipped back into AWS. And then it's really, why is it important for that? Because then the customer can take that data and then do some level of do run machine learning algorithms across that, get more insights out of that data and really monetize that data, right? So a lot of that, we all know that data is really important, right? And collecting this data from all these different edge locations, and to be able to process that, that's a huge, potentially new revenue streams or new insights that you can gather, right? So that's why really that's the focus around getting that, all of that put into AWS, and the customer being able to access that through various tools. So the Snow family that I talked about is really the kind of the centerpiece around, from a storage point of view. It looks like a suitcase. The Snowball itself looks like a suitcase. It has the compute, and it's either compute optimized or storage optimized device for extreme conditions. It can be extreme weather, extreme locations where it's not necessarily like as set up as well as your data center. Snow Cone is a smaller version of it. And that can be again transported where you want. And again, the whole point of that is that you can actually store the data, do some local processing, and actually connect back to your, whenever you have connectivity back to your backend AWS region, you can just transfer that data back into your main cloud environment. Again, just a quick set of services that are supported here. Pretty comprehensive again, and still keeps increasing. Talking about processing at the edge, what we talk about is essentially from the reason some of the use cases are performance, right? So you want to be able to have, dynamically, to improve your cache hit ratio, right? That's really what you're looking for. From a dynamic content generation point of view, you have things like A/B testing, right? You want to be able to render some local pages. You want to be able to change some dynamic content and so on and so forth, right? That's really what you want to use processing for. And then you have your origin independence, where you may not want to change anything on the back end, but you just want to maybe change something on the front end, which is stateless logic, and you want to be able to change it to like pretty URLs, and it comes up in a nice search, in search optimizations and so on and so forth. And then finally, you have security, right? So you want to be able to harden your security, things like putting logic in for bot for fighting off bots and so on and so forth. So things like that you can do. So that's really why what you use edge processing for. So we will be using serverless mechanisms on this processing at the edge. And essentially, serverless doesn't mean no servers, but it's really you don't have to manage any of these underlying servers. So there are two things that are used. The first one is Lambda, which I think people are very familiar with, which is really kind of an event driven architecture where based on change in event you invoke a function and then you run into you call Lambda. So that along with CloudFront, which is the CDN, is really called Lambda at Edge, right? And that is really how, just a quick thing. Again, I just want to rush through a little bit in terms of how this is architected, and you can definitely look at the slides later. There are the other parts, along with Lambda at Edge, there is also CloudFront Functions, which is essentially a lightweight JavaScript feature that's also available on CloudFront itself. So it kind of lets you handle some of those, it's very performant, scalable, secure, and so on, and integrates well with CloudFront. So that's a new feature. So again, native to CloudFront, and just a quick kind of view of how it integrates with CloudFront, how it's invoked from CloudFront. So it's not Lambda Edge versus CloudFront per se, but they can both work together. They both have their own functionality, and they both can be used in complementing each other. And then, so finally coming into multi-cloud solutions, again, a list of bunch of services that goes across observability and hybrid solutions and data and analytics. We have solutions across all of these different components. Some scenarios that we talk about is like, if you want to connect, if your primary is Azure AD, and that's where you have your groups and, IDs and groups, you can actually connect into AWS using that. The second one is we have a product service called Data Sync, which is really to sync up the data between cloud providers and AWS back and forth. Here is an example of how you would architect something like that on a Google with GCP and AWS. And then we have another service called Elastic Disaster Recovery Service, which is really meant for disaster recovery, right? So you can see this from the diagram here that, the primary is Google Cloud. The backup or the DR side is managed on AWS, and you can do back and forth, and you can leverage that EDRS tool to actually, copy the data back and forth, both disaster and primary. And then you have EKS, obviously, containers goes across cloud providers, but the neat thing about this is on the same console of AWS console, you can actually see other cloud provider Kubernetes, clusters also. That's kind of the neat thing. And again, there are, links to talk about blogs, to talk about the details around that. And then finally, you have a systems manager, which is used to manage, patch and scanning and so on. And you can go across cloud providers to use the same tool to manage those VMs and infrastructure. So essentially, that's kind of the different scenarios that we use multi-cloud for. So with that, I went slightly over time. I apologize for that. But if there are any questions, I can definitely work with Ron later on and address those for the folks.